Flash Gordon in the Radium Minds of Electra. These are the dailies by Austin Briggs, or at least the first volume of it. The dailies from 1940 to 1942. Now, before I get into the review, I should give some background. And if you're already familiar with Flash Gordon, you'll just have to forgive me here. But a lot of people aren't familiar nowadays. I discovered this when I had this book at work. This is a book I got from my school library. Some of my coworkers had no clue who Flash Gordon even was. So, some background. Flash Gordon is a comic character. Sorry, I just caught myself there. I was about to say comic book character, but he actually was in the newspapers. You know, he was a comic strip character. So these are strips that ran in the newspapers once upon a time, way back in the 1940s. He actually made his debut in, I believe, 1934, and he was in the Sunday papers. So, in America, at least back in the days of the newspaper heyday, the Sunday papers had the full-color comics with the long strips, and Flash Gordon had adventures in the Sunday paper, in the comics in the Sunday papers. Now, Flash Gordon was originally, I guess you could call him a ripoff of Buck Rogers, who was a very popular character in the newspapers at the time. I don't really know that much about Buck Rogers, so I'll skip over that, other than to say because of the success of Buck Rogers, King's Syndicate, which was the syndicate that handled these newspaper comics, was trying to get a competitor launched with Flash Gordon. According to Wikipedia, they originally tried to buy the rights of John Carter of Mars from Edgar Rice Burroughs. Burroughs didn't sell them the rights, so that ended up falling through. But John Carter of Mars, if you've read the books, is the story of an American guy who winds up having adventures on a foreign planet. He winds up on Mars and has adventures on Mars. Flash Gordon is kind of the same premise. Flash Gordon is an American who ends up on the planet Mongo. Kind of the same premise as John Carter of Mars. I've reviewed some of the John Carter of Mars books on this channel. I'll try and remember to link to them and the link to my review in the description down below. But at any rate, Edgar Rice Burroughs did not sell them the rights, so they created their own character, Flash Gordon. And Flash Gordon debuted in 1934 and then was in the newspapers ever since. These are the dailies in this collection here, which he eventually spun out into the daily newspaper comics, which I'll talk about in just a sec, which is what these are. And then, he had TV shows. He had a few very famous movie serials. Those serials that they used to make in the 1930s and 40s where they would just show like 15 minutes of the movie in the theaters every Saturday matinee. There were a couple of very famous Flash Gordon movie serials. And I guess for people of my generation, most infamously, George Lucas was inspired by Flash Gordon. And George Lucas grew up watching those Flash Gordon movie serials. And when he became an adult, he wanted to adapt Flash Gordon, buy the rights to it and make his own Flash Gordon movie to rediscover the wonder he had as a young boy watching those in the theaters. They refused to sell him the rights to Flash Gordon, so George Lucas ended up making Star Wars instead. In fact, we even have a quote here from George Lucas on the back. It says, "Originally, I wanted to make a Flash Gordon movie with all the trimmings." And then ... And I think the rest of that quote is something to the lines of, "But they didn't sell it to me, so I couldn't, so I made Star Wars instead." And I mean, as we go through this, I think the Star Wars influence, or the influence that this had on Star Wars, will probably be very obvious. Now, let me divert here to talk about my own personal experience with Flash Gordon, which was, I never saw him around when I was a kid in the 80s or 90s. I guess that there was a TV show in the 80s, Defenders of the Earth, a cartoon show which combined Flash Gordon with a couple other characters that were owned by King's Syndicate, namely Mandrake the Magician and the Phantom. I think Mandrake the Magician is also advertised at the end of this collection. But yeah, other than that, I never watched that TV show. I was only vaguely aware of it. Other than that, I never really remember hearing that much about Flash Gordon. When I became older and, being a huge geek, started to research into this stuff more, and especially when the internet came into its own and you could look up everything on Wikipedia, then I became more aware of Flash Gordon and his place in pop culture history, and was very interested in it, but never really came across it. Now, as always, I want to give a note of caution with my own experience. It could just be that I missed it. I don't recall Flash Gordon books ever being available at my local bookstores. I don't recall anyone at my school ever talking about Flash Gordon or being interested in Flash Gordon. I grew up I was a kid in the 80s, early 90s. But yeah, by all means, let me know in the comments section what your experience with this was. My experience is I was largely oblivious to it all throughout the 80s and 90s. And then, I guess with the internet, it's much easier to be a nerd now because you can just look everything up. And I think it's much more widely known, at least among Star Wars fans, and in this day and age we're all Star Wars fans, that George Lucas was very influenced by Flash Gordon. But I never had the opportunity to actually read the old Flash Gordon comics until I got it out of my school library. You can see it's a library book here. And it's actually in the school library because I ordered it for them. I was in charge of a project of getting more graphic novels into our school library in order to encourage more extensive reading among the students. And I thought, I tried to do a little bit of everything to have some variety. So I thought, why not order some Flash Gordon comics? Now, Titan Books is I guess, republishing all the collections. The first one, the Sundays Volume 1, On the Planet Mongo, this is the one where it all began. And this is the one that I would have ordered, except I went to Amazon and there were no new books in stock. There were only used books in stock, which were being sold on Amazon, at least, at an inflated rate. Maybe these are collector's items already. Aside from starting out at Volume 1, I just went with this volume, which was a little bit newer and readily available on Amazon. Now, this version is the first volume of the Dailies. Again, Flash Gordon started out in 1934 as a Sunday-only comic strip character. but then he was launched into a 6-day-a-week comic strip character. So you can see these are arranged here on the page by, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then we have next week because it's the end of the week. And of course, there's no Sunday because the Sunday strip was on a different continuity. And then we pick up the story again Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So just in the newspaper strips like that. Now, the publisher's introduction here gives me some background, and I've also supplemented this with what I've read on Wikipedia. But I guess that Flash Gordon was so successful as a Sunday strip that they decided to also launch a daily strip. But the storyline in the daily strip was separate from the Sunday strip. So there were two storylines going on simultaneously. They were drawn by different artists. This guy was, where is he? Austin Briggs. The guy who was doing it on the Sundays was, what was his name? Alex Raymond. Apparently they were both written by the same ghostwriter, Don Moore. But yeah, separate artists. Although it looks like Austin Briggs did eventually end up taking over the Sunday strip as well after 1948. But that's beyond that's beyond the contents of what's in this book. Yeah, according to the introduction here, it was a separate continuity. A separate storyline. And occasionally they said it contradicted the continuity of the Sunday strip. Although I haven't verified that for myself. This is the only Flash Gordon book I've read so far. So this is all I know. Take my opinion with a grain of salt because this is all I know. I haven't read the Sunday strip collections to find the original Flash Gordon. But yeah, based on what I've read, it's good. It's a lot of fun to read. So Flash Gordon is on the planet Mongo, where way back in 1934 his adventures began. Again, these dailies start in 1940, and these are the beginning of the dailies here. So this is the very first strip of the dailies. So it starts out with a completely fresh adventure. Now, the idea behind these strips is the planet Mongo is ruled by Ming the Merciless. Ming, by the way, is widely thought to have been inspired by Fu Manchu from the Insidious Fu Manchu stories by Sax Rohmer, which I've also reviewed on this channel. I'll try and remember to link to that in the description down below. But anyways, yeah. Ming rules Mongo, and he's this evil tyrant. And Flash is fighting for freedom and fighting against Ming's rule. So Ming's soldiers are always trying to capture Flash, and Flash is always fighting them and on the run from them. But while that's going on, there are all sorts of other dangerous things on the planet Mongo, like all sorts of dinosaurs and beasts and gigantic spiders and ape men and everything like that. But also, there are all sorts of other kingdoms within Mongo. This may be a little bit off topic, but it reminds me a bit of the Wizard of Oz series, the Land of Oz series, which I've been reading and reviewing on this channel. So in the Land of Oz series, all of Oz is ruled by Ozma. And yet in every new book, we find some little hidden kingdom within the Land of Oz that's actually not ruled by Ozma, even though the book series keeps asserting that all of Oz is ruled by Ozma. Flash Gordon seems to be the same. Ming the Merciless is the ruler of all of Mongo, but we keep finding all these little civilizations or hidden little kingdoms which are Ming doesn't know about and which Flash has adventures in. So what is it? In this one, there's a little kingdom which is hidden behind, it's hidden behind this invisibility shield. And then once he goes in, there's 8 men down here. And then in another one, there's, I think what are referred to as white Indians, these kind of savage tribesmen. Sorry, I'm flipping around trying to find out where it is. Yeah, over here. That's Flash Gordon, but those are the kind of Indian type characters he's fighting against. So many different lands and creatures in the land of Mongol, all ruled by Ming. Now, the publisher's introduction gave me a heads up that there were certain themes that kept getting repeated over and over again in these Flash Gordon comics. And this is something that was inherited from the themes of the Sunday strip, apparently. And you can see them here in this introduction. So Flash is traveling with his girlfriend, Dale. Funny name for a girl, huh? Dale. But maybe that was more popular in the 1930s and 40s. But wherever they go, there are always princesses of these other little kingdoms that get saved by Flash, and then they immediately fall in love with Flash. You can see that here. How can I ever thank you? Not that way, please. And then Dale gets incredibly jealous, and Flash has to deal with her irrational female jealousy. And this happens over and over and over again. There are so many female princesses that seem to fall in love with Flash. And Flash will sometimes find himself in compromising situations with them. Like he'll end up kissing them because he temporarily is stunned and forgets they're not Dale, or in some cases he kisses them to keep their spirits up or something. Where is it? Sorry, I'm oh yeah, here we go. So she says, "Go away, you don't love me, let me die." And he says, "Come on, snap out of it, the forest is on fire." Flash tries to calm the hysterical girl. "Of course I love you now, Lita. Now come on." So he does end up kissing a lot of these princesses. And they are, there's a lot of drawings of, attractive princesses standing, where's a good example? Standing near Flash, or there's an example right here at the back of the book. Sorry. Maybe that wasn't a great example, but lots of pretty girls are filling this book. And then the adventure at the end had took this same formula and cranked it up a little bit, where there's this Queen of the Jungle who falls in love with Flash, of course, because they all do. But it is also trying to enslave him. So, if you beg me to, I might let you loose to become my slave. And Flash himself will occasionally... He refers to her as a little spitfire, and he'll kisses her not a few times. Some of the times seem to be superfluous, like he doesn't really have to do it. Yeah, like you're just a woman, and it's time you knew it. Quit playing games with me, you little spitfire. And then he kisses her. His girlfriend Dale is not around at this time. I mean, I don't know why he does that. And then threatens to spank her on a couple different occasions. Stop that, you little devil. Any more foolishness and I'll spank you, queen or no queen. That spanking comes up one more time in here. I forget where. But you can see... this is getting a little bit, not just a damsel in distress, but a little bit kinky, perhaps. And I guess it raises the question of, well, I guess kind of all these panels of Flash kissing princesses, to me at least, raise the question a little bit of who is the target audience for this. I mean, like, certainly... This strip generally, and I'll get to all the good stuff in a moment. This strip generally, with all the explosions and dinosaurs and giant spiders and nonstop action, seems like it would be like the ideal thing for a 6, 7, or 8-year-old. I mean, I wish I had this collection when I was like 8 years old. It's just so purely the thing like a young boy would like. But, you know, I wasn't interested in kissing at 8 years old, right? That didn't kick in until a little bit later. I certainly wasn't interested in spanking a girl at that age. So I don't know, maybe some of this was appealing to... boys who were a few years older. But yeah, that element of that is in here. Okay, but yes, back to the stuff that boys of any age would definitely love. So because these are daily strips, there's a little bit of a... what's the word going on? A little bit of a technique going on here, where you've got to advance the story in 3 or 4 panels every day, and you've got to leave the reader with a little bit of a hook to keep them coming back for the next day, and yet you know, I was a little bit worried actually when I picked this up that the first panel would be recounting the events from the day before. But it's totally not. For the most part, they don't seem to be worried at all if you missed a day. Or I guess they're assuming their readers aren't missing any days. So each panel just jumps right into it. And it's just non-stop action in that way. It can get a little bit exhausting. Like it's not... You know, if this was like a comic book, like a graphic novel that had been designed to be read in one sitting, they would have evened out the pacing a little bit. So you would have had like more of a setup, a build-up, a climax, stuff like that. Here it's just non-stop action. But that non-stop action can be quite thrilling when they get on a good run. So, you know, I mean... Here's a good example here. They're racing through. Ming is trying to bomb them. Flash is saving them. They get out of the forest fire and right into the river, and then they get attacked by the river monster, and Flash has to save them from the river monster. And then almost immediately after that, they meet the Birdmen, and they're just barely meeting the Birdmen when the Birdmen are getting attacked by Ming, and then Flash has to fly off and fight them, and it's just a crescendoing action. It's also combined. I mean, this is just like a classic boys science fiction story because it combines the exoticism of these strange lands and these strange dinosaur creatures with the things that boys are fascinated with planes and trains and automobiles and ships. So when Flash and his men and Dale are escaping from Ming's city, it's just a classic kinetic story with just full of all the machines boys like. So here they're zooming around in their cars and they're getting bombed by Ming's planes. So they jump into the subway and more explosions. Then they are able to escape through the tunnels, and then they they hijack this armored train. So now they're taking this armored train, but Ming's rocket ships are attacking the armored train, as well as there's a battle with the ships out here. So Flash is diving in to fight on the ships, and while he's doing that, the rocket ships are still attacking, and then they get out the train again. The train is under attack, so Flash flies up in one of the rocket ships to protect the train, where the train is also shooting its guns at Ming's rockets. And then they eventually get to this bridge and onto the boat, and it's just... Sorry, I know I'm not describing this the best, but it's just has a feeling of just increasing action without relenting. They're on the boat, and the boats get attacked by Ming's bombers, with just full of armored trains and boats and rockets and explosions everywhere, and just all those classic things with science fiction, the shooting rockets, the rushing trains, the cars racing through the city. But then, after that, we are out into the land of the white Indians here, which are, I guess, Indians in the sense of Native Americans. I mean, they're not really Native Americans; they're on the planet Mongo. But that stereotype, although apparently they're white, and then the princess falls in love with Flash and saves him from the poison arrow. So once again, another princess falls in love with Flash. Oh, Flash Gordon, actually, I should mention this. This surprised me a bit, maybe, or something that I wasn't completely expecting. Flash Gordon throughout this series is portrayed as throughout this book is portrayed as a man's man. He is so manly and muscular and so strong, and he's athletic. Back on Earth, he was a sportsman, a football player, a polo player, and it's just constantly talking about how great and masculine he is. And of course, he's always taking off his shirt. And I thought, I don't know, it seems to me, let me know what your sense of this is. Seems to me that nowadays the trend for this kind of ultra geeky science fiction stuff is to have heroes that are more like the audience. The audience usually being unathletic boys who spend way too much time inside reading comic books or playing video games. So that there's usually like an average boy or person who just through circumstances of fortune finds himself the hero. That's more the trend now, huh? But Flash is always portrayed as like this alpha male, super strong guy. So I just thought maybe that was interesting, and maybe the way escapist fiction for boys maybe has changed over the years, or am I completely off on that? There's an interlude here in the middle of the book in which Flash goes back to Earth to fight the Nazis. And the publishers try and set this in context in the introduction by talking about how all of the comic strips at the time integrated World War II into it somehow. Even Buck Rogers, who took place in the future. Now, in Flash Gordon's case, Flash Gordon actually does not take place in the future. Flash Gordon takes place in the present. He just happens to have traveled to the futuristic planet of Mongo. You know, a planet with Mongo with advanced technology. So once Flash finds out that Earth is in trouble from these armies, they travel back to Earth to try and save Earth. And then there's, for whatever reason, they never call the Nazis, and they never actually show them with the swastika. They've got an armband here that has a cross on it. A publisher's introduction didn't quite understand this choice either. I mean, what are they? Are they worried about getting sued by the Nazis, or I don't know what? But it is obviously a conflict taking place in Europe. There are, you know, very distinctively European villages during this part where Flash Gordon, he's got this plan to kidnap the Fuhrer in the war, but that doesn't quite work. So he ends up kidnapping someone else. And then they go back to Mongo to get more supplies with the idea of coming back to Earth. But then they don't come back to Earth, at least not in this collection. Interesting thing about coming back to Mongo. There's now Prince Baron, president of Mongo, who is a loyal friend of Flash. And I was like, well, wait, that's not right. Mongo is controlled by Ming the Merciless, right? Who is this Prince Baron guy? Now for this, the publisher's introduction gave me no help, but Wikipedia helped me out a little bit on this. It appears that, I think somewhere around 1941 or something, in the Sunday strips, Ming the Merciless was overthrown and replaced by Prince Baron, Prince Baron had previously been the ruler of the Forest Kingdom on Mongo. So now Mongo is not a hostile land. Mongo is controlled by Flash's allies. But of course, it wouldn't make for an interesting story without any conflict. So Flash has to, well, it continues the thing of going through to several different lands, and in each different land, there's conflict. For example, his friend Prince Barum tells him to go out what does he say? You see, I've sent 3 different ambassadors to Foresta, and they've all vanished before they reached Queen Tigra. So he's got to go to Foresta now and find Queen Tigra because Prince Baron's ambassadors keep disappearing, and that's where he meets the queen who he wants to spank over here. And yeah, unfortunately, this collection kind of ends on an unsatisfying note here. But you know, that's because these strips never really ended. You always needed a hook to get the reader back next week at the end of the week. And the daily strips ran from 1940 to 1944. This collection only goes to 1942. So there's, I guess, another collection out there with the rest of the daily strips. And then after 1944, the daily strips were canceled, apparently. And it was just back to the Sunday strip. And then the daily strips were restarted again in the 1950s. All of this is on Wikipedia, etc. So you don't need me to recount that all for you. Yeah, what else is there to say about this collection? I found it really fun reading. It is. I don't know if this is coming through on the camera. If you just flip through it, it can sometimes, just looking at these pictures, look a little bit difficult to kind of follow what's going on. But if you do read it, like sit down and read the captions for each one, then you can follow the story fine. You know, it's one of these older comics where you really do need to read all the text to follow what's going on, because yeah, otherwise it's just sometimes some odd images. And I guess going along with that, this took me a while to read through. Now, you know, I'm a slow reader, and I also have very little free time these days. So in my case, it took me several weeks. It probably wouldn't take the average person several weeks, but this is several hours of reading here. I think no matter how you cut it, and that's good. It means you're getting your money's worth, because you know these things aren't cheap. This is $49.99 US. I mean, I got it out of the library, but it would have been $49.99 US. But you know, I think if I had spent my own money on this, I think I could justify it. It's a lot of hours of reading. The like I said before, the fact that the story just never lets up is a positive as well as a negative. There are some stretches where the writers really have a feeling of just amplifying the tension more and more and more, and it's really exciting. There are also sections where I just kind of wanted a break from the nonstop action. And then the other thing is, you know, the characters are just dreadfully boring. I mean, Dale, Flash, there's just no personality here at all. The side characters as well. I don't know if these characters have any more personality in the Sunday strip. But, you know, I complain about there being too much action. But to a certain extent, any panels where there are not action, like this, it's just so easy to fall asleep. You know, the princesses are all interchangeable. They all just fall in love with Flash. Dale always gets jealous. Oh, by the way, I trust this has been implicit in everything I've been saying about these books, but just to make this explicit, yes, these books are horribly dated and sexist by today's standard. So, you know, I guess that deserves to be said as well. But you know, they're boys' escapist fantasy from the 1940s. So, yeah. So I did, to a certain extent, there were times when I found my mind wandering, even though this sounds a little bit silly to say that about a comic book, especially a comic book like this, which is so action-packed. But there were times when I had to catch myself, like, oh, I just tuned out there. Go back and read that again. But I don't want to end on a negative note because on the whole, I really enjoyed reading this. And you can so totally see where Star Wars would get its influence from this. I mean, the laser guns, the exotic locations, all the rockets diving around, the trains and the ships and the cars zooming around, interspersed with, yeah, here's flying sharks, interspersed with all the exoticism of these strange planets. Um, in fact, dare I say it, almost makes Star Wars look a little bit boring. I mean, there's so much more going on in here. But yeah, I would recommend this if you ever get a chance to read this. And by all means, let me know in the comments what your experience with Flash Gordon was like.